wake up one morning in the year 1526, and you are Anne Boleyn. You don't know yet whether that is a blessing or a sentence. Only that from the moment you set foot in the Tudor court, you've stepped into a blood-soaked game where no one truly wins. Your father is no great nobleman, just a clever political climber who knows how to rise at the right time. Your sister has already been used and discarded by the king. And you are the next card on the table. The girl whose gaze makes Henry forget his lawful wife and risk tearing Europe apart just to have you. But in return, you will lose everything: your reputation, your health, your friends, your family, and in the end, even yourself. Later generations would call you a witch, a manipulator, a woman with 6 fingers and a serpent's soul. But that's just the story they told after your head was gone. The truth is that you were sharper than the women around you, more educated, quicker with your words, and daring enough to play politics in a way that made even the men afraid. You had lived in France, learned how to wield language like a silk-wrapped dagger. You were not shy before powerful men, not afraid to speak before ambassadors. And you had the audacity to look Henry straight in the eye when others bowed. That was what made the king fall for you. But it was also what made the entire court despise you with every breath they took. Henry said he loved you. He said he would marry you. But there was a small problem: he already had a wife, Catherine of Aragon, a legitimate queen, daughter of Ferdinand and Isabella, aunt to Emperor Charles, and a woman who had reigned for 18 years with the love of the English people. You weren't just the other woman. You were the one who dared to rip a crown off a queen's head and challenge the divine order. When Henry sought divorce, the Pope refused. Europe erupted. For 6 long years, you lived in limbo, not a queen, not a mistress, not a wife, not even yourself. You breathed under the weight of eyes that hated you, pulpits that damned you, pamphlets that painted you as a monstrous hybrid, part human, a part snake because you wouldn't be silent. And then Henry broke the rules. He left Rome, formed the Church of England, and married you. A secret ceremony, a hasty coronation. But you were queen at last. The only problem: you were already pregnant. Everything rested on that unborn child. If it were a boy, you would triumph. If not, everything you had sacrificed would be for nothing. When the baby was born, it was a girl. Elizabeth and Henry's expression shifted from pride to disappointment in the space of a single breath. Then came the terror. You suffered 3 miscarriages. One of them, a male child. Whispers followed you like shadows, God's punishment. Acurse, the mark of a witch. Jane Seymour, quiet and obedient and virginal, began to appear at court more often. And the same men who once helped you rise began to turn away. Cromwell, your father-in-law, even your own father, grew silent. In April of the year 1536, if you were arrested while watching a tennis match, the charges were wild treason, adultery, incest with your own brother, plotting to kill the king, planning to remarry. The accusations made no sense, had no proof, but they flew fast and stuck hard. The men accused with you, Mark Smeaton, Henry Norris, were tortured or tricked. Your brother George was accused of incest just to ensure your ruin. Your trial was a performance. Your fate already decided, and your own uncle pronounced the death sentence. On the day of your execution, you dressed in gray and red, the colors of dignity and martyrdom. You did not scream. You did not beg. You lowered your head and forgave the man who came to kill you. A French sword, ordered by Henry, promised a cleaner death. You were 35 years old. You had been queen for only 3. And one day after your head fell, Henry was already engaged to Jane Seymour. 2 weeks later, he married her. You were buried without ceremony. Your name was scraped from paintings. Your initials burned from memory. But you refused to disappear. Elizabeth, the daughter once deemed a failure, became queen in the year 1558. She ruled for 44 years and made England an empire. She never spoke your name aloud, but she wore your falcon badge, kept a ring with your initial, and governed with the same sharpness you once showed. Her reign was your revenge. Anne Boleyn was not forgotten. She was executed, slandered, and erased. But 5 centuries later, those who destroyed her have become footnotes in her story. She is now a symbol of ambition, of intellect, of a woman who refused to shrink into silence. Her story is a warning that to shine as a woman in a world built for men is dangerous. But even more dangerous is trying to erase someone like her. Because in the end, the louder they tried to silence her, the more clearly history heard her voice. You wake not as a queen, not even as a mistress, but as a girl in a borrowed dress, your fingers still chapped from the winters at Hever, your mind trained to move fast, and your smile trained to shine brighter than your rank allows. The year is 1526, and you are Anne Boleyn, just arrived at the glittering and poisonous Tudor court, a place where beauty is currency. Wit is a blade, and every mirror is a two-way window. You've spent your formative years in France, where courtiers bowed with velvet voices and women laughed behind feathered fans. And now you return to England with a French accent that sounds too elegant for English ears, a sharp tongue that speaks before thinking, and eyes that do not yet know how to lower themselves when the king walks by. The palace is not as beautiful as you imagined it. The tapestries are musty, the air thick with unwashed silk and sweat masked by perfume. The corridors narrow and dim, where gossip clings to the stone like damp. You are watched, not admired. Watched by the queen's ladies, by the king's courtiers, by the servants pouring wine who carry more secrets than the priests. You walk through halls where every footstep echoes louder than it should. And you learn very quickly that here, silence can be fatal. But speaking can be worse. You smile at the wrong time, and someone whispers that you're bold. You frown at the wrong man, and someone accuses you of pride. You exist in a space where the rules are never written down, and those who break them rarely get to tell their side of the story. And then he notices you, the king, Henry, a man who fills a room with laughter and menace in equal measure. He is large in voice, large in presence, larger still in the imagination of those around him. He has already bedded your sister. Mary discarded her like a dull toy after she became pregnant. But you are different. You will not be cast aside. You know that, or perhaps you only hope it. And hope is dangerous in places like this. You are not his mistress. Not yet. Not quite. You keep your distance. And that, ironically, is what draws him closer. In a court full of women who curtsy low and speak softly, your refusal to bow too deeply becomes a kind of invitation, and you can feel it, the shift in the air when he speaks to you, the silence that falls behind your back, the smiles that curve too wide when you walk past. The attention is intoxicating, until it isn't, because the king's gaze brings more than favors. It brings enemies. Women who once laughed with you now stiffen when you enter a room. Men who once danced with you now weigh their loyalty. Every gift he sends, every glance he offers, is another stone in the sack tied around your ankles. You begin to understand that rising in court is not like climbing a ladder, it is like walking across a frozen lake. Every step forward is a crack beneath your feet. And the only way not to drown is to keep moving without looking down. And there is no privacy. You never truly understood what that word meant until you lost it. You cannot weep without a witness. You cannot write a letter without it being read. Your chambermaids report to your father. The Queen's ladies watch for signs of betrayal. Ambassadors whisper your name in letters back to Rome and Spain. There are no locked doors here. Only thresholds that powerful men walk through whenever they please. Every conversation you have is a performance. Every silence you keep is a weapon. The Queen knows. Of course she knows. Catherine of Aragon. Pious and proud. Older than you by nearly 2 decades. Watches you with the tired wisdom of a woman who has seen her husband wander before, but this time it is different. This time, the woman in question is not willing to step aside. You are not here to be discarded. You are not here to carry his child and disappear. You are here to win. You are here to rule. And everyone around you knows it. The courtiers, the clergy, the foreign dignitaries, they all feel the shift in the wind. The king is no longer satisfied with love affairs in the shadows. He wants change. He wants freedom. He wants you. But you are not free. You cannot be. Not here. Each day begins with fear. And each night ends with questions. What did you say today that might be turned against you tomorrow? Who stood too close? Who smiled too long? Who will betray you when the tides turn, because they always turn? You've seen it happen. How the court lifts a woman only to drop her when the next one smiles. You are rising. Yes. But you are rising in a place where gravity always wins. Your hands tremble sometimes. You hide it well. You wake in the night and stare at the canopy above your bed, counting the days since your last misstep. You wonder what the price of ambition will be, and whether you'll survive long enough to pay it. You haven't even worn the crown yet, and already it weighs heavy on your skull. And yet, and you smile, you charm, you dance, because to falter, even once, would be to fall completely. You tell yourself this is the price of power. You tell yourself this is only the beginning. You tell yourself quietly, in the dark, that you are ready. But deep down, somewhere beneath the silk and the pride and the careful words, and you know the truth, you have entered a world that does not forgive women who want more than they're given. And you are Anne Boleyn. You want everything. And that, perhaps, is your most unforgivable sin. You wait. That is what the next 6 years become. A waiting room between disgrace and glory. An agonizing corridor, with no doors to open. Only eyes watching from the walls, from the moment Henry speaks the words, "I will marry you." The court stops breathing. The world narrows around you. A tunnel where time stretches and hope turns brittle. You are no longer simply the girl who caught the king's eye. You are now the woman who dares to want the throne. And that, in Tudor England, is a desire soaked in danger. The year is 1527 when the king's great matter begins, a polite euphemism for his obsession with unmaking his marriage to Queen Catherine and replacing her with you. But you are not naive. You know this will not be quick. And it is not. The Pope will not agree. Rome is not just a city, but a fortress of political entanglements. Catherine is not just a wife, she is a Spanish princess. The aunt of Emperor Charles. A woman married to Henry for nearly 2 decades, who has walked through plague, childbirth, and war by his side. The Church cannot afford to dishonor her. Europe will not permit it. But Henry is relentless. And so you wait. Crowned not with jewels, but with rumors, and dressed not in royal gowns, but in gossip. Every day you live in the space between royal mistress and future queen, but never secure in either. You are paraded at court as the king's intended, but there is no wedding, no ring, only glances that burn and words that sour in the mouths of those who speak them. Londoners hiss when you ride by in your carriage. Clergymen spit sermons with your name buried beneath layers of venom and righteousness. You are called a temptress, a whore, a foreign Jezebel with the devil in your blood and heresy in your heart. Pamphlets spread stories of your deformities. 6 fingers, a mole shaped like a serpent, eyes that glow in candlelight. They call you witch, poisoner, usurper, and worst of all, they believe it. Meanwhile, Catherine clings to her title with the grace of a woman wronged and the strength of a queen who knows her place was not meant to be taken. She will not step aside. She will not bend. And because of that, neither will Rome. You become the symbol of everything that threatens the moral order. A woman with too much ambition, too much voice, too much influence. You, Anne Boleyn, are no longer just a woman. You are the embodiment of danger itself. Dressed in French silks and speaking Latin verses, and the world is watching, sharpening its knives behind smiles. Yet Henry holds on to you with the fervor of a man who believes he is above time, law, and fate. His letters, feverish and hungry, arrive with gifts, books, jewels, tokens. He writes of your eyes, in your wit, your ability to make him feel like a king, even when his authority is being questioned by the church. He declares that he will have you, no matter what. And still, you do not yield. You do not become his mistress. You draw a line in the sand and dare the most powerful man in England to cross it not for pleasure, but for permanence. And so you play the waiting game. 6 long years. 6 years of court appearances, private whispers, and endless diplomatic failures. You become a fixture in political dispatches. Your name inked across Europe as both seductress and scapegoat. Every failure to secure papal annulment is laid at your feet. Every treaty that falters, every alliance that cracks, somehow leads back to you. You, who have not asked for a throne, but have not denied it either. You, who smile through the venom, who laugh at court banquets, while your hands tremble beneath the table. You, who know that the only thing worse than waiting is being forgotten. Inside the palace, the game becomes crueler. Allies are few, and every friendship feels like a negotiation. Your father sees your rise as his own. Your uncle, the Duke of Norfolk, supports you only when it suits his faction. The reformist clergy view you as a potential savior, not because they care for your soul, but because you represent a break from the papal grip. Evan Thomas Cromwell, clever and ambitious, watches you like a chess piece, waiting to change sides. No one loves you without agenda. No one protects you without cost. And yet, you endure. Your tongue, sharp and witty, slices through gossip like a blade. Your posture remains regal. Even when your position is anything but, you learn how to survive among men who want to own you, and women who want to become you. You master the art of restraint, of smiling through betrayal, of speaking just enough to be feared and respected, but never so much as to be eliminated. Because you have seen what happens to women who speak too loudly, the court becomes a theater, and you play your part with precision, behind closed doors. You and Henry debate scripture, argue with passion about church reform, and whisper of a future where your children wear crowns. But behind your back, the knives continue to glint. The imperial ambassador refers to you only as the concubine. Never lady. Never queen. The queen's household refuses to acknowledge your presence. And Catherine, unwavering, prays for your soul as if you are already dead. The strain seeps into your bones. You sleep less. You smile with greater effort. You begin to understand that to live in the favor of a king is to walk a line drawn over fire. Some nights you lie awake and wonder if you have made a mistake, if the crown is worth the solitude, if Henry's passion will one day cool, if your own body will betray you by refusing to carry a son. You wonder what future awaits a woman who holds everything, but only as long as a man desires her. And then, the unthinkable happens. Henry does what no English king before him dared to do. He breaks with Rome. In the year 1533, the Church of England is born. The Pope is cast aside. The clergy is reshaped. And you, Anne Boleyn, become Queen of England. But there is no trumpet of triumph. No sigh of relief. Because with that crown comes expectation, so heavy, it nearly cracks your spine. You must bear a son. You must give this kingdom an heir. You must justify 6 years of war with the world and silence every voice that called you wicked. You must become not just queen, but salvation. You are crowned while visibly pregnant. And everyone watches your belly more than your face. They calculate the days. They whisper about sin. And you smile. Because smiling is all you can do. You are now Anne the Queen. But even queens bleed. And even queens fall. The waiting is over. But the danger is only just beginning. The year is 1533. And you are finally Queen of England. But the triumph tastes hollow before it ever reaches your tongue. Because before the ring is warm on your finger, before the jewels are settled on your brow, you already know that everything the Reformation, the scandals, the broken queen you have replaced, has bought you nothing but time. Your womb is the battlefield now. Your body, the court's obsession, and the only thing standing between you and the abyss is the hope that the child inside you is a boy. The coronation is a grand spectacle, a desperate performance of legitimacy, meant to convince a watching kingdom that you belong where you stand. Westminster Abbey glows with candlelight and the heavy scent of incense. Nobles kneel. Schwar sing. Banners hang from every stone pillar, but beneath the velvet, beneath the gold, beneath the elaborate French hood hiding the sweat on your brow, you are already more prisoner than monarch. The people do not cheer the way they once cheered Catherine. The bishops bless you with words, but their eyes are wary. Even Henry's smile is strained, his hand too firm at your back, as if reminding you who you are, what you owe him, and what you now must give. And you are already swollen. The court knows. The timing is obvious. The whispers cannot be silenced. That belly, full and unmistakable beneath layers of embroidered silk, speaks the truth. No priest would dare. You and Henry did not wait. You are not only queen, you are scandal. And so everything rests on the child. One child. One boy. A son who would rewrite the narrative, who would silence the pulpits, heal the broken alliances, and wash away the bloodstains left by your rise. But when the hour comes, when the midwives gather in the overheated sealed chamber, where no man is allowed and no air is permitted to move, the child who enters the world is not a savior. She is a girl, red-haired, wailing, beautiful but undeniably, heartbreakingly, female. You name her Elizabeth. And from the moment her first cry echoes against the stone walls of the palace, The disappointment is suffocating. Henry does not hide it. The court does not hide it. No one congratulates you. No one dares pretend this is enough. You have done everything they asked. You have waited. You have endured. You have given up your privacy, your freedom, your name. You have stood in fire and worn the crown they said you did not deserve. But this daughter, to them, it is failure wrapped in swaddling clothes. You hold her close, this small warm weight against your chest, and feel the room pulling away. The midwives curtsy, but not deeply. The ladies in waiting whisper before they leave, and the silence Henry offers you that night is more brutal than any words he might have spoken. And so you smile, because you must. You smile at the christening. You smile through your tears when Henry tells you there will be more children. You smile even when you see Jane Seymour in the corner of your eye. Quiet. Pale. Watchful. You return to court, wrapped in furs and dignity. And you play your role. The queen. The vessel. The hope of a dynasty not yet born, but behind closed doors. You are breaking. Because no one tells you how hard it is to keep smiling, when every glance is a question. When every month without a new pregnancy is a whispered disappointment. When every step through the palace feels like walking across cracking ice. You bleed once, and then again. Miscarriages. They call them, but in Tudor England, they are more than personal losses. They are political catastrophes. Each one chips away at your foundation, at the fragile throne you sit on. And each time, Henry grows colder. Not cruel, not yet, but distant. His touch less frequent. His visits more rare. His eyes wandering. You begin to feel what Catherine must have felt. You begin to understand what it means to be a woman in a royal bed. To watch your value fade with each passing month. You who once captivated the king with your cleverness, now must rely on your body alone, and it is failing you. You try to laugh with him. You try to remind him of the fire that once lit between you. But Henry is already turning away. And in that space, in that dangerous silence, Jane Seymour begins to shine. She does not flirt. She does not challenge. She does not speak unless spoken to. And that, somehow, is what makes her glow all the brighter in Henry's eyes. She is the opposite of you in every way. And for a man who now finds you exhausting, she is peace. You see it happening. The shift, the shadow that grows in his gaze when he looks at you, and you are helpless to stop it. By the time the year 1535 ends, your enemies have begun to gather, not with daggers drawn. Not yet, but with patience. They do not need to rush. They know what you are beginning to know, that you are slipping. That the crown on your head no longer sits so straight. That a queen who cannot give a king his heir is a queen who cannot last. You wake at night in cold sweats, feeling as though the palace walls are closing in. You clutch Elizabeth to your chest and whisper, promises you know you may not live to keep. You fear for her, because you know how the world treats daughters of fallen queens. You look into her bright, curious eyes, and wonder what she will remember of you, if she will remember you at all. And then, one final time, you feel hope spark again. In early 1536, you conceive. You cling to that hope like a woman drowning. You whisper to no one. You pray to a God you're not sure still listens. This time, surely, will be different. This time, the child will be a boy. You need it to be. You tell yourself that everything, your crown, your safety, your legacy depends on this. And then, after an argument with Henry, after seeing him whisper with Jane in the hallway, after a fury You cannot name tears through your chest. You bleed. Again. And this time, it is a boy, a small, perfectly formed son, lifeless in your hands. You scream, but there is no one to hear you. You sit in your chamber with blood on your thighs and silence in your soul. And you know, with terrifying clarity, that it is over. The crown may still sit on your head, but it is no longer yours. The king is already slipping away. The court is already shifting. You feel it in the glances of your ladies. You hear it in the sermons. You smell it in the air. You, who once made the king defy a continent, are now a woman with empty arms and no more chances. And for the first time since this began, you do not smile. You live. But only just. After the final miscarriage, the one that might have saved you, the son, you held only long enough to feel his warmth fade. You return to court not as a queen triumphant, but as a shadow of the woman who once made kings tremble. The palace is colder now. And not just from the wind outside. You feel the shift in every corridor. Every gaze. Every silence that used to be filled with flattery, and now echoes with calculation. The women who once curtsied deeply, now barely lower their heads. The men who once fought to kiss your hand, now turn their eyes away. You are still queen. Yes, but in name, more than in power. Henry no longer waits for you to speak. His eyes seek Jane Seymour now. Soft and obedient, whose silence has become her greatest weapon. She walks the court like a ghost of everything. You are not mild, pliable, untouched. And you, Anne, who once dazzled him with your brilliance, are now too much, too loud, too sharp, too bold. He does not say this, not directly, but you hear it in his sighs, in his sudden absences, in the way his hand no longer lingers when it brushes yours in public. Love has curdled into obligation, and obligation, in a king's heart, never lasts long. You try to reclaim him. You dress in your finest gowns, the French silks he once adored. You wear the jewels he gave you when his passion still burned hot. You speak softly. You smile. You laugh at his jokes, even when they cut. But you are not her. And more damningly, you are no longer new. You remind him of failure, of waiting, of daughters where sons should have been. He looks at Elizabeth, your clever, red-haired girl with affection. Yes, but not pride. And each time he sees her, he sees you. And each time he sees you, he remembers that she is all you could give. You have made enemies, more than you can count. Some are quiet, patient men who waited for your fall like foxes in the brush. Thomas Cromwell among them, a man whose loyalty was always to power, never to people. Some are loud and smiling, like your Uncle Norfolk, who helped lift you to the throne only so he could later hold your head in his hands and claim it was justice. Even your father grows distant, ashamed of the scandal that now seems to stain the family name. And worst of all, and you feel the shift among the reformers, the very movement you helped to empower. They see you now as dangerous, too visible, too loud, too female. Their cause needs purity, simplicity, not a woman with a crown and a voice and too many enemies. The courtiers murmur. The rumors multiply. They say you mock the king behind his back. They say you laugh at his poetry, scorn his virility, humiliate him in private. They say you threaten Princess Mary, Catherine's daughter, that you called her a bastard and promised she would pay. None of it is provable. None of it. Perhaps even true. But in the Tudor court, truth matters less than repetition. Whispers grow roots, and roots grow thorns. You begin to feel hunted. There is no other word for it. The air changes around you. People pause before speaking. Jokes fall flat. Your footsteps echo too loudly in hallways that once bent to greet you. You pass Jane in the corridors, and she lowers her eyes with the modesty of a woman who knows she is winning. You see the guards outside your chambers, lingering longer than they used to. You wonder, late at night, if your letters are being read, if your servants are listening, if your enemies are counting the days until they do not have to pretend anymore. And yet, you hold your head high. You speak boldly in council. You argue with Henry about the monasteries, about the Bible, about how the new church's riches should be spent. You are not content to sit quietly and embroider. You speak for education, for access to scripture, for reform. That means more than money and power. And in doing so, you make more enemies still. Cromwell listens, and he takes note. He sees a woman who will not bow. And in that moment, he begins to imagine a world where you are no longer queen. By the spring of 1536, and the tension becomes a fog you cannot walk through. Every day, the court grows more brittle. Henry is gone more often hunting, he says, visiting Jane's family estates, though he does not speak it aloud. And you, Anne, are left in your rooms with your daughter, your dwindling allies, and the echo of your former power. You are still regal, still radiant, but you are a sun whose light no longer warms the king. You are a name that makes his advisors flinch. And then, the final straw. You know not what word, what look, what sentence sealed your fate. Perhaps it was a joke made too sharply. Perhaps it was a conversation twisted in its retelling. Perhaps it was simply time. But suddenly, everything moves fast. Too fast. Cromwell begins gathering names. Whispers of treason, of adultery, of conspiracy to kill the king. Your friends Mark Smeaton, Henry Norris, your own brother George are questioned, zazed, imprisoned. You hear the footsteps echoing through the corridors as they come. And you know, on the second day of May, they arrest you. You are watching a game of tennis, smiling. When the guards arrive, the silence is deafening. They do not explain. They do not need to. You are led away, not as a queen, but as a criminal, and as the gates of the tower close behind you, the same tower where you spent the night before your coronation, you understand the cruelty of symmetry, the beginning and the end, in the same place. But this time, there will be no crown waiting, only a sword. In the darkness of your cell, till you try to breathe, you remember the moment Elizabeth first wrapped her tiny hand around your finger. You remember the sound of Henry's laughter when he first kissed you in secret. You remember every friend who promised loyalty and is now silent. You lie awake and try to find the line. When did love become threat? When did power become poison? You are not innocent of ambition, but you are not guilty of treason. And yet, you know that the trial to come will not ask what is true. It will only ask what the king wants to be true. And by now, Anne, you know exactly what that answer will be. The air inside the Tower of London is thicker than you remembered. Not the weight of stone or the stink of damp walls, no. This heaviness comes from something deeper. It is the pressure of silence, full of decisions already made, of a death sentence that walks beside you like a shadow, with no need to speak. From the moment they close the gates behind you, You have known there is no way out. The charges are not real, but the intention is. And in the Tudor court, that is all that matters. You sit alone, once Queen of England. Now, a prisoner accused of sins you did not commit, waiting for the men who once raised you up to finish what they started. They say you committed adultery with 5 men. They say you conspired to murder the king. They say you lay with your own brother. The words are not meant to be believed. They are meant to stain, to blacken your name so thoroughly that when the sword falls, no one will flinch. But the accusations, ridiculous as they are treated as fact before your feet even touch the courtroom floor. Cromwell has arranged everything. The jury is filled with men who owe their fortunes to the king's favor or your downfall. The evidence is scraps of gossip, twisted timelines, confessions pulled from men who screamed under pressure. But truth is no longer welcome here. You are allowed to speak, and you do. You stand in that room, surrounded by your enemies, and you defend yourself, not as a frightened woman, but as the queen you still are. You speak clearly, steadily. You look into their eyes and remind them of your innocence, of your loyalty, of your service to England. You say you have never been unfaithful, that you have never spoken of treason, that you love the king and wish him no harm. But your voice, as strong as it is, falls into a well already filled with conclusions. They do not want truth. They want closure, a clean ending, a final page. The men accused alongside you are tried first. Henry Norris, Mark Smeaton, William Brereton, Francis Weston, your brother, George Boleyn. Each one is condemned. Some deny everything. Some say too little. Mark, the only commoner among them, confesses whether from torture, fear, or persuasion. No one can say. George is charged with incest, a crime so foul it stuns even the court into momentary silence. He defends himself with dignity. But dignity does not weigh as much as politics. They are all sentenced to die. The tower fills with ghosts still breathing, and your world shrinks to a cell with stone walls and a window too high to reach outside. The court prepares for your end, with the efficiency of men washing their hands. Jane Seymour is moved closer to the king. The nobles reposition themselves. The courtiers erase your name from their flattery. The crown you once wore sits quietly in its box, awaiting a new head. You, Anne, are no longer spoken of as a person. You are a lesson, a mistake, a warning whispered to ambitious women. You are reduced to a list of sins, to a body waiting to be emptied of breath. But you are not passive, not even now. You write to Henry. You ask for mercy, not for yourself but for Elizabeth. You remind him that she is innocent, that she is his daughter, that her future should not be buried alongside yours. You do not beg. You do not rage. You remain composed, even as your body shakes. At night, you pray. You sing hymns. You cry only when the walls are too thick for the guards to hear. You try to remember what peace felt like, back when you were a girl in France, before your name was a weapon, before your body was a battlefield. And then, one by one, the executions begin. You hear the bells. You hear the crowd. You hear the axe. The men who were said to have loved you, who perhaps did nothing more than speak kindly, who were guilty only of proximity, are gone. George is gone. Your brother. Your blood. Your ally. He dies with dignity, refusing to confess to what never happened. His death, like yours, was not about truth, but about silence. They needed to kill your power. And what better way than to suggest it was unholy? Your own death is delayed. The swordsman from France has not yet arrived. So you wait. You wait while they build the scaffold outside your window. You listen to the hammering. Each blow a heartbeat. You watch from behind the curtain as they prepare the place where you will kneel. There is no escape. Not a prieve. Only time stretching thin and cruel. You begin to laugh softly. At first, you say your neck is so small. The blade will have no trouble. You say perhaps you will be a saint. Perhaps they will write songs about you. You say it to keep from screaming. And still, you prepare. You choose your gown carefully. Gray damask over a red petticoat. The color of martyrdom, hidden beneath the color of mourning. Your final costume. Your last performance. You write letters. Short and careful. Filled with grace. You forgive. You pray. You kneel before your ladies and ask their pardon. You think of Elizabeth. You think of Henry. You think of the girl you were and the woman they feared. On the morning of the 19th day of May, the swordsman arrives. Everything is ready. The court is not invited. Only a small, controlled audience is allowed enough to witness, not enough to grieve. You are led to the scaffold. You walk without faltering. The grass is wet beneath your feet. The sky is low and gray. The crowd watches in silence. And you, Anne Boleyn, bow one final time. Your speech is brief. You do not blame. You praise the king. You speak well of the law that condemns you. You say only what must be said. Because Elizabeth still lives. And the words of a dying queen carry weight. You do not admit guilt. You do not confess. But you submit. It is the only card you have left to play. You kneel. You are blindfolded. You whisper, "To Jesus Christ, I commend my soul." The Frenchman lifts his blade, and in the space between breath and no breath, the world tilts. You are 35 years old. You were queen for just over 1,000 days. You leave behind a daughter, a kingdom, and a silence that will echo for centuries. But Anne, your story does not end here. The morning after the sword fell, London woke to silence. Not grief, not outrage, just silence, the kind that follows a storm when the wreckage has already been swept away. The Tower of London stood still in the mist. Its stones slick from the night's dew. Its courtyard scrubbed clean of blood, as though nothing extraordinary had happened there. And yet something had. A queen had died. A woman had been cut from history in the space of a heartbeat. The ravens gathered on the tower green, restless and black against the pale sky. And the city below continued its endless, indifferent rhythm. Bakers opened their stalls. Bells tolled for mass. The river carried on, gray and unbothered. The king's court, meanwhile, prepared for a wedding. Within 24 hours, Henry was betrothed to Jane Seymour. Within 2 weeks, he was married. There were no tears for Anne. No requiem. No period of mourning. Her possessions were seized. Her embling, the crowned falcon, was removed from palace walls. Her initials, A, intertwined with H, were chiseled away from stone and burned from tapestries. Her jewelry was dismantled. Her gowns refitted for another queen. In official records, her name was erased as though she had never been. The woman for whom England had been torn from Rome was reduced to a footnote in the king's personal ledger, executed for treason. He wrote, and that was that. But history, unlike kings, is not so obedient. In the chapel of St. Peter ad Vincula, within the tower itself. Anne's body was placed in an arrow chest, because no coffin had been prepared. It was lowered into the earth without ceremony, without music, without even a priest who dared to speak her name aloud. The few who had loved her had vanished or were in hiding. Terrified of guilt by association, only her ladies, trembling and red-eyed, remained long enough to cover the shallow grave with handfuls of cold soil. And then they, too, were gone. For a time, it seemed as if Henry had succeeded. The court moved on. The courtiers learned to praise Jane Seymour with the same fervor they had once reserved for Anne. The same mouths that had called Anne the most graceful lady in Christendom now called her a witch, a harlot, a stain upon the throne. Poets who had written verses in her honor now composed lines in mockery. Thomas Cromwell, her orchestrator and executioner, was promoted. He smiled through feasts, toasted the king's new happiness, and congratulated himself on having cleansed England of a dangerous woman. But power, in Tudor England, is a wheel that never stops turning, and those who set it spinning often find themselves crushed beneath it. Outside the palace walls, the people were slower to forget. There were murmurs in taverns, quiet questions in markets. Had she truly betrayed the king? Had she truly lain with her brother? Had the queen who smiled so softly and prayed so openly really plotted murder? Some said no. Some said yes. Some said nothing at all. For silence was safer. But even as her name was forbidden, it lingered in the songs of washerwomen, in the whispers of servants, in the glances of those who remembered the way she had carried herself head high. Even as they cursed her, Anne's absence became its own presence, her ghost stretching from the Tower to Hampton Court, from the corridors of Whitehall to the fields of Kent. In the private chambers of the king, Jane Seymour now sat where Anne had once sat, quiet and pale, her voice soft, where Anne's had been fierce. Henry looked upon her with the weary devotion of a man desperate to rewrite his own story. He told himself he was happy. He told himself that God had forgiven him. He told himself that this time would be different. But late at night, when the candles burned low and the walls creaked with the memory of words spoken long ago, he sometimes dreamed of a woman with dark eyes and a mocking smile. And he woke with his heart pounding, uncertain whether it was love or guilt that had roused him. Beyond the court, Europe took note. The Spanish ambassador wrote of Anne's death with satisfaction, calling it divine justice. The Pope in Rome gave no blessing, but quietly rejoiced that the heretic queen was gone. Yet among reformers, her death sent ripples of unease. They had seen in her a patron, a woman who read forbidden books and believed the Bible should belong to all men, not just priests. To them, she became something new, a martyr of conscience, a symbol of a movement that no sword could silence. And then there was Elizabeth, barely 3 years old, red-haired and bright-eyed. The child was stripped of her title, declared illegitimate, and sent away from court. She was too young to understand the coldness that replaced her cradle's warmth, too young to know that her mother's name could no longer be spoken. But perhaps, somewhere deep within her, a shadow remained the faint memory of a voice that once sang to her softly at night, of a touch that had been taken too soon. Those who watched her grow would later say that the little princess carried herself with a peculiar kind of grace, a self-possession uncommon in children, as though she already knew the world owed her a debt it could never repay. As for Anne's enemies, their triumph did not last. Within a few short years, Thomas Cromwell, The man who had built her scaffold found himself accused of treason and met the same blade he had once ordered for her. Jane Seymour. 2. Paid a price. She gave Henry the son he longed for. And then she died. Pale and bloodless. Less than 2 weeks later, Henry wept for her. They said. But his grief was brief. He married again. And again. And again. Wives came and went. But none erased the stain of Anne Boleyn. Each new marriage was haunted by her absence. Each queen knew her story. Each wondered, quietly, if the same fate awaited her. Years passed, and yet her name refused to die. Travelers spoke of seeing a woman in gray, wandering near the tower, her hands clasped around an invisible book. Servants swore they heard her laughter echo in the halls of Hampton Court. Superstitious guards claimed that every time the ravens grew restless at dawn, it meant the ghost of the beheaded queen was walking again. But it was not superstition that kept her alive. It was memory. It was injustice. It was the enduring fascination with a woman who had played a dangerous game and lost her life. But not her story. And somewhere beyond the reach of Henry's laws, beyond the stones of the tower, beyond even the prayers of those who pitied her, Anne's legacy began to take root. The little girl she left behind was growing. Quietly. Away from the court's eyes. She learned to watch before speaking. To smile before striking. To survive in a world that had devoured her mother. And though she would never say it aloud, though she would never hang Anne's portrait or speak her name, Elizabeth would one day become everything Anne had been denied. The ruler England never thought it would have. The queen no man could silence. In that way, Anne Boleyn did not die on the scaffold. Her breath ended. Yes. But her story continued in the daughter who would outlive all of them. In the nation that would rise under her child's reign. And in the centuries of voices that would whisper her name when the walls of the tower grew quiet. Because you can bury a queen. You can burn her letters. You can melt her crown. But you cannot kill what she became. And Anne Boleyn had become eternal. Time, for Anne Boleyn, did not stop at the scaffold. Her body was buried. Her name erased. Her enemy satisfied. But history, like the river that wound past the tower where she died, kept moving. And in its current, Anne began to change. No longer the living, breathing queen who had laughed too loudly, fought too fiercely, and wanted too much. Instead, she became something else. A story, a warning, a question. For the generations that followed, she was not Anne the woman. She was Anne the symbol, Anne the sinner, Anne the saint, Anne the witch, Anne the martyr. Everyone saw something different in her, and most never saw her at all. After her death, Henry did everything a man could do to vanish her from history. He ordered her emblems destroyed, her portraits taken down, her letters hidden or burned. He proclaimed her a traitor, her marriage null, her daughter illegitimate. He married Jane Seymour so swiftly, with such brutal speed, that even his courtiers blinked. But no amount of remarriage could cleanse the stain left behind by what he had done. Because for all his power, he could not control the shape of memory. He could not keep Anne's name from echoing where silence was expected. The Tudor court moved on as it always had. Jane gave him a son and died before she could enjoy the title of wife. Anne of Cleves was sent away in humiliation. Catherine Howard, young, pretty, and careless, met the same fate as Anne. The blade again falling in winter. By the time Henry married Catherine Parr, his sixth and final wife, the court had learned that love meant survival only if it stayed quiet. But Anne's voice, though severed, remained, in locked chests and whispered memories, in scraps of letters, in the delicate features of the red-haired girl who bore her blood and her fire. Anne, her ghost, became more than myth. It became proof that power could be punished, but not erased. Still, for a long time, her reputation was not hers. The first accounts of her life were written by men who hated her. Catholic propagandists painted her as a seductress, a sorceress, a woman who had led a king into apostasy and dragged a nation with her. They wrote of her deformities, extra fingers, varts, serpentine eyes, fantasies meant to turn fear into revulsion. She was called a concubine, a homewrecker, the great whore of England. She was blamed for everything: the fall of Catherine, the execution of Thomas More, the deaths of innocent monks, the desecration of the sacred. Her intelligence was twisted into cunning, her ambition into corruption, her charm into manipulation. And for a time, that was enough. The world believed it. Even during the reign of Elizabeth Anne's own daughter, the past remained dangerous territory. Elizabeth, shrewd and cautious, and never spoke Anne's name in public. She did not keep her mother's portraits where eyes could see them. She did not demand that Anne be remembered, but she did not forget. She wore Anne's falcon badge. She carried a ring that bore her mother's miniature. She learned from Anne's rise and fall that power must be cloaked in mystery, and affection should never be visible to those who might weaponize it. Through Elizabeth's silence, Anne survived. As the centuries passed, Anne's image began to shift. In the Protestant imagination, she was reclaimed as a martyr, executed not for adultery, but for her role in England's religious transformation. Reformers saw her as a heroine who had brought the Bible into English hands, who had stood for education, for conscience, for scripture over superstition. The woman who had once been painted as poison was now remembered as a purifying fire. But even this version of Anne was more symbol than self. Still, no one asked who she had truly been. The real Anne, clever, angry, radiant, insecure, desperate to be loved and terrified of being powerless, was buried beneath the versions made by others. Then came the Victorians, with their fascination for tragedy and moral lessons. To them, Anne was a warning for ambitious women, a tale of how desire and pride lead to ruin. In their portraits, she stared solemnly, modestly, stripped of the sharpness that once made her unforgettable. They softened her edges, redressed her in chastity, and wept over her ending. But even as they mourned her, they did not understand her. They could not. Anne had lived in a world where women were expected to be quiet, and she had refused. That refusal was still too dangerous to embrace fully. It was not until the modern era that Anne began to rise from beneath the rubble of centuries. Historians began to dig deeper, not for scandal, but for substance. They found a woman who had spoken for religious reform, who had promoted scholars and thinkers, who had kept a French Bible in her chamber and dared to challenge the idea that truth must come only through priests. They found letters written in her own hand, filled with wit and tenderness, frustration and longing. They found traces of her in court records, in the poetry of her brother, in the defiant words she spoke at her trial. And slowly, painfully, a clearer picture began to emerge. She had not been a saint, nor had she been a demon. She had been a woman alive, brilliant, flawed, navigating a court where safety was an illusion and power a double-edged sword. She had wanted love, and instead found legacy. She had longed for security, and instead left behind a question that still burns: what happens when a woman dares to reach for the crown in a world that believes she is meant only to support it? Today, the name Anne Boleyn no longer carries the weight of treason. It carries the weight of curiosity, of complexity. She is studied, debated, mourned, admired. She appears in novels, films, documentaries. Some still paint her as seductress, others as victim, but more and more, people see her as something greater, a woman of her time who saw beyond it. A mind ahead of a century that feared minds like hers. And perhaps most remarkably, she is remembered more vividly than almost any queen of her age, not because she succeeded, but because she refused to disappear. Visitors walk the stone paths of the tower now and pause where she died. They place flowers. They whisper her name. They tell her they remember. And in that remembering, she lives again. Because history, after all its revisions and redactions, has a sense of justice. And Anne Boleyn is no longer silent. She is gone. Anne Boleyn, Queen of England, lies beneath the stones of the Tower Chapel, in a grave unmarked for centuries, her name carved only into the whispers of history. And yet, beyond the place where her blood was spilled, beyond the court that banished her memory and married her replacement before the earth had even settled above her body, something extraordinary begins to unfold. The child she left behind, the girl no one wanted, the daughter Henry once looked upon with disappointment, grows, and as she grows, she becomes the shape of justice Anne would never live to see. Elizabeth Tudor, born in the year 1533, raised in uncertainty, declared illegitimate, used as a pawn, and passed between households like a burden, becomes the woman who will one day wear the crown her mother once died for. It will take time. It will take the deaths of others, a brother, a sister, a host of advisors who underestimate her, but she will survive them all. And when she ascends the throne in the year 1558, she will not do so in her mother's name, but with her mother's fire in her blood. She will never speak of Anne publicly. She will never attempt to restore her mother's titles or call for her remains to be reburied with honor. That would be too dangerous, too political, too revealing. But in the silence, there is truth. She wears Anne's falcon badge on her coronation ring. She surrounds herself with men her mother once favored. She keeps a miniature portrait of Anne hidden inside a locket that never leaves her side. And most of all, she governs with the same razor-edge intelligence that once made Anne beloved and feared. Through Elizabeth, Anne lives not as a shadow, but as a foundation. The reign of Elizabeth stretches 44 years. During that time, England transforms from a fractured kingdom into a global power. The Spanish Armada falls. The golden age of poetry, of theater, of exploration begins. Religious warfare does not vanish, but it softens. The church her mother helped create becomes part of the national identity. Bibles in English, education for the literate poor, a queen who rules alone, who never marries, who answers to no husband or father or pope. This is the world Elizabeth builds, and in every corner of it, whether named or not, is Anne. Henry, in all his frantic search for sons, never lives to see what his daughter becomes. He dies thinking himself victorious, married 6 times, leaving a son he believes will secure his legacy. But that son, Edward VI, dies at 15. His eldest daughter, Mary, rules briefly and dies childless. In the end, It is Elizabeth, the daughter. Henry once declared a bastard who reigns longest, rules strongest, and reshapes the very image of monarchy in England. She is not the heir Henry wanted, but she is the heir Anne gave him. And Anne's blood does not stop with Elizabeth, though the Queen never marries, never has children of her own. The Boleyn family name survives, through marriages and noble lines, through the Howards and the Careys and the Knowleys. Anne's descendants scatter through British aristocracy. Even today, the current royal family carries strands of Anne's lineage, an invisible thread woven into the crown itself. In this way, the woman Henry tried to erase becomes part of the very institution he hoped would outlive her. For centuries, people return to Anne. Writers, artists, scholars. They tell her story again and again, sometimes with cruelty, sometimes with compassion, but always with fascination. She becomes the subject of plays, of novels, of films. She is reimagined, romanticized, villainized, resurrected. Some call her a victim, others a shamer. But in all versions, she remains unforgettable. There is something in her sharp, unyielding, alive, that refuses to be buried. And in the end, perhaps that is her greatest triumph. She was not born to be a queen. She had no royal blood, no powerful claim. She rose because she dared to believe she could. She loved a king and lost her life for it. But she left behind something greater than a crown. She left behind a challenge to power, to tradition, to the silence expected of women. She showed the world what it looks like when a woman will not lower her gaze, when she refuses to be quiet, when she demands to be seen. And 500 years later, we still see her. Not as Henry wanted us to see her, not as a mistake or a monster, but as a woman who changed a kingdom. As a mother whose daughter changed the world. She walks now through the tower, not as a ghost, but as memory. She stands in the shadows of Hampton Court, not as a warning, but as a witness. She whispers from the pages of history, not with sorrow, but with defiance. Because Anne Boleyn was never meant to vanish. And in the end, she didn't. She became eternal.